So here we have an activity. It says the period of a pendulum. So remember, a pendulum is where you've got a ball that's swinging back and forth. And it says the period of a pendulum is the time in seconds it takes for the pendulum to swing back and forth. The period t, so they're using t just to represent how long that took, is represented by t equals 1.1 times the square root of L, where L is the length of the pendulum in feet. So they're going to be changing this string length on here to change the length of that pendulum. Okay, so here's where we're going to go ahead and use our calculator. Now, my calculator that goes with the smartboard does not have a square root on it, and my computer calculator doesn't show up on the screen. So I'm going to kind of take you through the steps with you working your calculators. I'm going to kind of verbalize and show some different pictures, but I do not have a calculator that will work with my smartboard that has a square root button. Okay, so when we go through and we work through this, to do square roots on your calculator, you should have a button that looks something like this. That's called the square root button. Now, it's going to depend on your calculator. Some calculators you have to push that first, and some calculators you punch in the number first and then hit that square root button. So you're going to have to go through and practice it. So to practice it right now with numbers that are pretty easy, let's just practice some basic square roots where we actually know or should know the answers to. So if I had the square root of 9, and on my calculator that I use, when I punch it in, I have to do the number first and then hit the square root. So the buttons that I push is I do I do 9. So I punch the 9 button and then I punch the square root button. Now, if you do that on your calculator and you get an error or it doesn't give you an answer, then you need to reverse your buttons. So some of you might have to do square root first and then do your number. So you're going to have to practice that. In either case, when you do this, if you once you figure it out, you should get a 3 for an answer. So you're going to have to figure out your calculator, which of those methods it is. Now, if you're not sure, pause your video and check with me so that I can help you figure out your button sequence on that, or check with somebody else around you. Okay, so now if we go through and we work through this process, I'm going to do the writing down below. So we've got the equation that's going to stay the same for each of these situations. Okay, so the first equation we have here is we've got to figure out our time, we're going to take 1.1 times the square root of this. So the square root of 1, what number times itself would give us 1? Well, that would be 1. So we're going to do 1.1 times 1, because we just figured out the square root of this as 1, which is going to give me 1.1 for our time. Okay, so now our next one. We're going to have to figure out the square root of 196. So on my calculator, I punch in 1.96 and hit the square root button. And when I did that, I got 1.4. Now I'm going to take that still times 1.1. And I know that I'm writing this in a separate order because I'm solving my square root first, which is what I need to do. I need to solve that square root first before I take it times the 1.1. Okay, so now when I do that, I get 1.54. Okay. And remember, these are times in seconds. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the next one. I'm going to go ahead and solve the square root of 3.2 first. So I need to do that first. So 3.24 and hit my, 3.24, hit my square root button. That gives me 1.8. Now I'm going to take that times the 1.1 again. So times 1.1. When I do that, I get 1.98 seconds. Oops. Okay, my next one, square root of 4.0, or 4 is 2. That one I can do in my head because it's a perfect square number that I've known since I was learning my multiplication facts. And then I'm going to take that times 1.1, which gives me 2.2. Okay, we'll go ahead and do one more. So 4.84, I need to do the square root of that. So that gives me 2.2. And now I'm going to take that times 1.1 on my calculator. And when I do that, I get 2.42. Okay, so you understand the process. So now what you guys are gonna do is you're gonna go ahead, pause your video, and finish working through the rest of solving these last four. So remember, you need to solve the square first, get that answer, and then take that answer times 1.1. Okay, so pause your video, finish out this chart, and then we're gonna go ahead and continue on with the graphing. Okay, so here's our graph. And I actually should have included yet another number in there, but when I went through and I did my graph, I'll just write it in. We went through and did the 4.84 together, which you guys have that on your table, so I don't need to write that in. We're gonna go ahead and now graph this information. And you have this on the page next to where your graph is. So when we graph this, we're gonna go ahead and do a line graph. So we have to remember that our L's, these are like our X's. We're used to seeing X and Y, and our T's our T is like our Y, and you can see that they are identified in those positions on our graph. They're just using L to represent our length and T to represent our time. So when we graph these, remember it's always over to your X, so over to 1, and then up to 1.1. The way that I would see this as a set of coordinates would be this. Okay, now we're gonna have to kind of guesstimate these decimal numbers, approximate where they would be. So when I do this, well, I'm gonna go over to 1, so here's my 1 line, and I'm gonna go up to 1.1. Every one of these boxes is worth 0.5, going up as well as across. So 1.1 is gonna be a little bit above my 1 line. So we'll go right in here. Okay, and remember, if we started out with no length, that would take no time. So we're going to start at 0, 0, even though that was not part of one of our numbers that we had or one of our coordinate sets. So our next one, when I go to do this next dot, okay, I would read this one here as 1.96. So that's close to 2, just under 2. And then, so over to 1.96 up to 1.54. So that's a little over 1.5. So over to 1.96, which is a little in front of our 2. And then up to 1.54, so a little above that halfway point. Okay, so there's my second spot. So now I'm going to go ahead and do my third one. So I've got 3, 2.4, or sorry, 3.24, 1.98. So 3.24 is going to be halfway in between that box of the 3 and the next box over, because that next box would be 3.5. So we're going to go in the middle of this set right here. Okay, and then up to 1.98, that's going to be just under 2. So somewhere around there. Remember, we're kind of guesstimating this. It's not going to be perfect. We're just trying to get them as close as we can. So then the last one I have up here right now is I'm going to go over to 4 and then up to 2.2. So over to 4, up to 2.2. So 2.2 is going to be kind of in the middle of this box, not quite. Okay, so those are the ones that we had done together. So what you need to do is go ahead and finish out graphing your last 5 spots. Remember, it's approximation, so try and get that in, and then go ahead and connect your dots when you're finished. So right now, this is what my graph is looking like. It's not going to be a perfect line. It's kind of going to be a curved line. And mine might not look perfect up here. Like I said, we're approximating where those are at. So you're going to go ahead and continue finishing out that graph, and when you're finished, grab the answer key and kind of check yourself. Don't worry if your graph is slightly off when you check your graph, but make sure that your numbers are correct.